The Qin Dynasty unified China and collapsed within 15 years. The Sui Dynasty lasted just 37 years from its founding to its fall. Two dynasties, 800 years apart, almost identical endings. The emperors of the Sui Dynasty were students of history. They know the story of Qin. Emperor Wen of Sui had studied that history. He understood why Qin had fallen, and yet 800 years later, his dynasty followed almost exactly the same path. This was clearly not the result of ignorance. So what caused it? Before the first emperor unified China, the country had been fragmented for nearly 500 years. The methods Qin used to achieve unification were built for war: extreme centralization, extreme efficiency, and an absolute refusal to tolerate dissent. These methods worked in wartime. But after unification, the first emperor never switched. He applied the same wartime logic to governing a country just emerging from centuries of conflict. Build the Great Wall, construct the palaces, campaign against the Yue in the south, strike the Yongnu in the north, and here lies the most dangerous part. Each of these decisions, taken on its own, had its justification, but layered together, pressed down onto an already exhausted country. The people had no room to breathe. 2 years after the first emperor died, the empire was in chaos. This lesson was known to every dynasty that followed, including the Sui. Emperor Wen of Sui unified the north and south in 589 AD, ending nearly 300 years of division. He understood the story of Qin better than almost anyone, and so he did many things differently. He reduced taxes and corvée labor. He restored agricultural production. He abolished many of the harsh policies of the previous dynasty. He laid the foundations for the imperial examination system. By any measure, he was genuinely trying not to repeat Qin's mistakes, but the mistakes he corrected were the obvious ones. What he could not see was a deeper structural problem. The reality facing any emperor immediately after unification was almost always the same. Old power structures needed to be consolidated. Local strongmen needed to be subdued. Crumbling infrastructure needed to be rebuilt. Border threats had not disappeared. And finances needed to be centralized. Every one of these pressures pushed the emperor in the same direction, toward greater centralization, and then more. It was not that emperors wanted to imitate the first emperor of Qin. It was that reality pushed them step by step down the same road. The structural pressure did not ease as the country stabilized. If anything, the more successful the unification became, the more it produced something even more dangerous: the confidence that comes with success. In his later years, Emperor Wen presided over a full treasury and a seemingly stable empire. He grew increasingly convinced that his own judgment could not be wrong. Historical lessons are abstract, stories about other people in other times. His own success was concrete, built by his own hands, visible every day. Concrete things are always more persuasive than abstract ones. And so, large-scale projects began. The people's labor was once again rapidly mobilized. Cracks began to appear, but he did not see them, or perhaps he saw them, and believed that this time it would be different. By the time of Emperor Yang of Sui, this confidence had become something far more extreme. Emperor Yang was learned and capable, and had formed his own views on the rise and fall of Qin, but he believed his abilities surpassed those of the first emperor. The Grand Canal, 3 campaigns against Goguryeo, the relocation of the capital to Luoyang 800 years later. The same logic appeared again. And once again, each decision had its justification. The Grand Canal linked north and south, shaping China's economic arteries for over 1,000 years. Goguryeo had long threatened the northeastern frontier. There was genuine strategic logic to the campaigns, but he compressed all of these into the same window of time, driving everything forward simultaneously. A country unified for barely 2 or 3 decades, with its people not yet recovered, could not bear this weight. He did not fail because he was ignorant of history. He failed because, after success, he had come to believe he would not repeat what those before him had done. In 618 AD, the Sui Dynasty fell, only 29 years after Emperor Wen had unified the empire. If every dynasty after unification faces the same structural pressures, then why did the Han Dynasty, which also achieved unification, not fall into the same trap? Many people point to the fact that Liu Bang had witnessed the collapse of Qin firsthand. The pain of that experience was written into his instincts, not easily overwritten by the illusions that success creates. But more important than that, the decisions of early Han were not made by one person alone. Xiao He, Yao Chan, Zheng Ping, Zhou Bo, these men formed a genuine system of checks. When Cao Can succeeded Xiao He as chancellor, he changed almost nothing of his predecessor's policies. He believed that good institutions did not need to be dismantled in order to prove themselves. Through the reigns of Emperor Wen and Emperor Jing, this restraint held. Light taxation, minimal demands on the people's labor, not because every emperor was innately wise, but because the system itself had built up an inertia that made it harder for any individual to push it off course. 800 years separated Emperor Wen of Sui from the first Emperor of Qin. 800 years, more than enough time for every person alive to know the story of Qin by heart. And yet, the same structural pressures, the same confidence that follows success, pushed the Sui dynasty toward the same ending. The first emperor of Qin was not foolish. Emperor Wen of Sui was not foolish. Emperor Yang of Sui was not foolish. They all knew history. They simply all believed. This time, it would be different. Looking back from today, we can of course say, if power had been distributed more broadly, if dissenting voices had been heard, if those grand ambitions had been spread across several generations, perhaps things would have turned out differently. Perhaps. But history cannot be hypothesized. Every person living inside those events had their own version of reality, their own logic they believed in, their own reasons for the choices they made. Seeing something clearly from the outside and seeing it clearly while standing inside it are two entirely different abilities. History's greatest trap has never been forgetting. It is that every generation of successful people believes they will not repeat what those before them got wrong. What truly makes history repeat itself is not ignorance. It is the belief after success that you will be the exception.